Hello everyone, welcome to our Reading and Writing Skills class. Hello my dear students, now we are ready to discuss the lessons for Quarter 2. For our first lesson we have Critical Reading as a Form of Reasoning. Allow me to present to you the learning competency and the learning objectives that we have to achieve for this lesson. Do you know what is reading? When we say reading, it is a cognitive process of decoding symbols to derive meaning from a text. It is always an interaction between the text and the reader. When you decode it, it means you may give meaning or interpretation of something that you read, and through this, you will be able to develop understanding of what you are reading. We read to gain and share information and ideas, whether for academic, personal, or professional purposes. That is how a reader and the writer interact using the text or material. There are three different reading strategies. We have previewing, skimming, and scanning. When we say previewing, it is looking at the readily visible parts of the text. It familiarizes you with the contents of the selection and focus on the important information in the text. You have to take a look or have an overview of what you are reading. When we say skimming, on the other hand, it means you look for the main point of the reading and identify the ideas that develop it. It requires higher order thinking skills, knowing that you must come up with the main point or idea of the text. Lastly, we have scanning. When we say scanning, it is looking for specific information. This strategy involves physically moving your eyes quickly along the lines of the text. It is just like having a quick overview of something, and you don't have to identify the main point. Rather, you have to look for a specific detail that can be found in the text. Now, what is critical reading? When we say critical reading, it means engaging what you read by asking yourself questions such as, what is the author trying to say? Or, what is the main argument being presented? It involves presenting a reasoned argument that evaluates and analyzes what you have read. Being critical, therefore, in an academic sense, means advancing your understanding and not dismissing and therefore closing off learning. When you read critically, don't only read something on the literal level. You go higher as your understanding towards the text goes deeper. When we say critical reading, it means to exercise your judgment about what you are reading. That is, not taking anything you read at face value. As a critical reader, you have to study the composition's every detail until you find the author's inconsistencies, oversights, limitations, and other reasonable arguments that are often overlooked by a normal reader. You don't only read between the lines, but you have to go beyond the line, and that makes you a critical reader. There are three steps of analysis, reflecting the three types of reading and discussion. The first one is what a text says or restatement, wherein the reader merely restates what is said in the original text. After critically reading a piece, you should be able to take notes, paraphrase key points in your own words, or just simply state again what you have read in the text. Through this, it may help you understand better what the text is all about. The second one is what a text does or description, wherein the reader discusses aspects of the discussion itself. You should be confident that you have understood the text sufficiently to be able to use your own examples and compare and contrast with other writing on the subject in hand. This is the part wherein you have to involve yourself in such a way that you have to use your prior knowledge, your experiences, and observations in order for you to understand what is stated in the text. And lastly, what a text means, or interpretation, wherein the reader analyzes the meaning of the text as a whole. This means that you should be able to fully analyze the text and state a meaning for a text as a whole. In this step, you go much higher since you have to give meaning, interpretation, judgment, analysis, or evaluation on what you are reading based on some factors perhaps as a result of one's reasoning or analysis. Critical reading does not simply ask, what the text says, but more of how the topic is presented and why. Critical readers dwell on the distinctive qualities of the text. Readers normally read text to obtain facts and knowledge. A critical reader, on the other hand, mulls over the unique perspective of the author on a particular text and how the facts the author presented arrived at his or her conclusion. It is all about going to the writer's mind on their perspectives upon writing the text and how they want the reader should understand it. What is reasoning? When we say reasoning, it is an act of giving statements for justification and explanation. It is the ability of someone to defend something by giving out reasons. Reasoning is a process of expressing ideas and opinions, as well as justifying a stand based on existing knowledge and experiences, according to Cambridge of 2016. As critical reader, you should be able to use textual evidence to support analysis of the explicit and implicit information presented by a writer in a text. Given the same text to other readers, you may encounter questions that will require your answer, in which you should have the skills of reasoning out and giving analysis and evaluative statements. What makes critical reading as a form of reasoning? One might have to read a text once to get a basic grasp of the content before starting to make an intensive critical reading. Avoid approaching a text by using "what information can I get out of it?" Rather, ask how this text works or how is it argued. How is the evidence, just like the facts, examples, and others, used and interpreted, and how does the text reach its conclusions? To read critically is how to make judgments about how a text is argued. This is a highly reflective skill requiring you to stand back and gain some distance from the text you are reading. Let's try to identify the difference between reading and critical reading. This is a summary of the difference between reading and critical reading as to purpose, activity, focus, questions, direction, and response. Please take time to read. The following are the different critical reading skills enumerated by Prentice Hall. The first one is the ability to distinguish between fact and opinion, the ability to identify the author's purpose, the ability to make inferences, the ability to recognize the author's tone, and the ability to recognize persuasive techniques. Therefore, a critical reader requires various skills when reading a text. Critical reading ultimately examines the author's choice of content, language, and structure. To read critically is to make judgments how a text is argued. Reading critically means you are thinking critically and you must question what you are reading. A critical reader has the ability to do the following. First one, accurately summarize arguments from the text. Next, identify claims. Next, discover stated or implied assumptions. Then, analyze and evaluate the preciseness of the reasoning that supports a certain thesis statement. And, analyze, evaluate, and explain the purpose of consequence of the use of particular facts or sources of information according to Barnett and Bedeau of 2011. These skills require higher-order thinking ability of the reader in order to formulate evaluative statements and determine evidences from a text read. Knott of 2016 suggested the following steps in doing critical reading. The first one is, determine the central claims or purpose of the text, or its thesis. A critical reading attempts to identify and assess how these central claims are employed or argued. Next, begin to make some judgments about context. You may ask yourself the following questions. What audience is the text written for? Who is it in dialogue with? In what historical context is it written? All these matters of context can contribute to the assessment of what is going on in a text. Third, distinguish the kinds of reasoning the text employs. You may ask yourself the question, what concepts are defined and used? The reader might also examine how the text is organized, just like asking the question, how has the author analyzed or broken down the material? Different disciplines just like history, sociology, philosophy, or biology will have the different ways of arguing. Fourth, examine the evidence or the supporting facts, examples, etc. the text employs. Supporting evidence is indispensable to an argument. You may ask yourself the following questions like, what counts as evidence in this argument? Is this evidence statistical, literary, or historical? From what sources is the evidence taken? Or are these sources primary or secondary? And fifth, critical reading may involve evaluation. Your reading of a text is already critical if it accounts for and makes a series of judgments about how a text is argued. However, some essays may also require one to assess the strengths and weaknesses of an argument. Always remember that when you do critical reading, you do critical analysis of the text, which require you to formulate good reasoning using proofs or evidences. I hope you understand our lesson. Thank you so much and see you all next week.